Hello, this is Julian with Coffea Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Orion WX wash processed Peru from Coffea Circulor. And there's the bag right there. And Coffea Circulor, based out of Gothenburg, Sweden. And this is part 2 of our 4-part series featuring Coffea Circulor's Nebula Constellation set. And I was definitely excited to see a Peruvian coffee featured in that set, as Coffea Circulor has featured a lot more Peruvian coffees this year. In fact, we've already reviewed one on this channel earlier this year, but this one also caught my interest because it did sound like the type of coffee that I would enjoy. And given that I've had great success with their Peruvian coffees as well as Peruvian gestas this year, it definitely felt like one that I was looking forward to discussing. So we will see how this one turned out. This right here is day 36. And once again, these are 100-gram bags of coffee, so this should be a shorter review. But the recipe we went with for this coffee was Coffea Circulor's recipe at a 15:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 95 degrees Celsius, about 203 degrees Fahrenheit. And I actually like this one best through the Chemex, which indicates a more medium grind roast profile for this coffee. It is on par with our previous review, which we said was on the lighter side of things, as Coffea Circulor with these set of coffees have definitely gone back to what we've known of them, which is on the lighter side of things by most standards and metrics, as they are a very light roasting coffee roaster. With all that out of the way, let's go and start discussing this coffee. Day 17, first impression, and we did opt for the V60, and it was offering lovely clarity right from the onset, as the honey was the most pronounced and defined aspect of the coffee, but it was followed by a bit of classic South American characteristics, including plenty of the listed caramel and vanilla, with plenty of sweet citrus in the finish. So this was a very nice first impression of this coffee, as I felt like the best of this one was definitely yet to come. We move on to day 20 as we opted for the Chemex, and there was still some sense of a fresh fruit component within the cup, but it came out in a much more soft and subtle side of things, with the tremendous depth present in a candied base with a high sugary sweetness encompassed by this citric finish. There's a slight herbal but soft intensity to the cup, lending itself towards another really positive impression of this one, and that's something I've said with a lot of the Peruvian geishas that we have reviewed this year. They do have that slight soda-like feel to them with that herbal quality. This one had it in a subtle sense as well, with the entire cup being, I would say, maybe a little bit sweeter than I was expecting, but once again, that's been the case with a lot of the Peruvian geishas that we've reviewed this year. Day 23 opted for the April brewer, and the cup was very well balanced through this brew method, as there was more of the intensity offered in the sugary sense, with it encompassing the citric quality to it, more of the slight herbality to complement the very candy bar and vanilla frosting-like cup, as I do have to say, continuing to feel very sugary in that sense, with plenty of the sweeter citric aspects to it yet again. We move on to day 26 as we opted for the V60 with Coffea Circulor's recipe, and the cup is slightly improved as there's a slight bit more clarity with much more of the strong sugary sweetness in the cup. It's a bit more reminiscent of a candy bar yet again, with a vanilla sugariness accentuated in the finish by a slightly more soft citric quality yet again, as the citric quality always seemed to kind of stay in a little bit more of a subtle sense relative to the rest of the cup, which skewed, I would say, interestingly, a little bit more on the origin side of things as opposed to the varietal side of things, as I felt like this one was much more of a chocolate bar-like cup, a little bit more of that vanilla-like cup in terms of the profile to it. A little bit more delicate with a pronounced flavor profile though, yet again. We move on to day 29 as we opted for the Chemex with Coffea Circulor's recipe, and the cup continues to improve as there's much more of the fruit brightness present, with a notable fresh citrus that's in line with the listed orange, as well as some soft stone fruits within the cup itself. It does continue to offer more of the candy bar-like sweetness with an abundance of vanilla nougat and caramel yet again, so another really nice day of this coffee. That's the best day I'd experienced to this point. And on day 32, we tried it one more time, as it was near as good as the previous day, offering more of the candy bar-like base with the nougat and caramel-like components to it. Citrus is present in both the finish as well as the brightness, as it comes out in a little bit more sweeter and fresh fruit sense yet again. There's a slight dark berry and sugary stone fruit that's also present, offering the cup some depth as well. So definitely experiencing a fair bit within this coffee, with a very defined chocolate bar-like base, complemented by plenty of profiles to it. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. Oops. And we have quite a few level 4s, so let's go through those, and we'll start with the cleanliness level 4. One of the first things I said about this coffee when we started discussing this coffee was that it was very well defined and a pretty clean coffee. And given that this is a washed Peruvian geisha, I think we would expect nothing less. And it's kind of halted there at that higher side of the level 4. I don't think that this one was ever going to reach that level 5 mark, as even with the Peruvian geishas that we've reviewed this year, I continue to say they're on the higher side of the level 4. I feel like maybe they're just lacking that very super clean quality that I typically only experience from washed Panamanian geishas or washed Ethiopian coffees. So while it's very clean, not to the extent of that level 5, but definitely still on the cleaner side of things. Finish level 4, and that's a fun one as it came in a number of different ways. So a little bit of that sweeter citric quality to it, as well as that herbal sense to it as well. While it is encompassed by that candy bar like base, there is that complementary aspect to it that does give it that slight, we'll say, soda-like feel that was found in a lot of the other Peruvian geishas we've reviewed this year. So level 4, nice finish to this one. Sweetness, level 4, and I might even say that it's on the slightly higher side of level 4, as that continues to be a trend and theme with these Peruvian geishas that we're reviewing, as this one came out much more in the candy bar-like sense. So while there is a slightly sweeter fruit quality to it, I do have to say that this is mostly marked by that notably sugary, sweet candy bar-like component to it. So definitely on the higher side of the level 4, definitely present, definitely pronounced. We move on to the florality, level 4. And while I mentioned the honey pretty early on in this and didn't mention it too much from that point going forward, there was also that notable vanilla quality to it. So that's where a lot of the floral aspects come within this one. Is it's a slightly floral vanilla-like component, a slightly floral honey-like aspect to it. But outside of that, I think I have to say that that's basically where the florality in this one ends. It does have that, I would say, a little bit more of a generic floral component that you can expect from a geisha coffee as well. So plenty of floral depth in this one too. We move on to the citrus, also at that level 4 mark, and as I mentioned, that orange quality that they do have listed on here made a lot of sense. Definitely nothing more in terms of the other citric components that you might expect, especially for a geisha coffee. I do appreciate the fact that it was on the sweeter side of things for that citric component, so having it at their level 4, a little bit more in line with my own preferences, was a very nice positive to this one. Caramel, level 4. I definitely have to say that that was one of the more pronounced characteristics of this one for me, as I was kind of surprised given just how much there was of it. And I've said in the past that when it comes to a lot of geisha coffees that aren't maybe traditional, like Panama or Ethiopia, we're talking like maybe something like Peru or Ecuador, or Mexico, it's always kind of interesting to see if you can get more of the origin characteristics or more of the varietal characteristics. And while a lot of the other geishas we've had skewed more on the geisha side of things, this one skewed much more on the Peruvian side of things, especially with that note, specifically the caramel aspect to it, as that seems to be the most pronounced and dominant component within this one. Let's move on to level 3s. We'll start with the acidity, level 3. As I continue to say with Coffea Circulor's coffee, not always necessarily the brightness, and that might be attributed to the way that we brew their coffees, given that we don't necessarily push them to the maximum, so that one's still there on a more moderate side of things at that level 3. Move on to the berry fruit, level 3, and I did mention that there was a slight darker berry aspect to it, thinking a little bit more along the lines of a grape-like quality, while not necessarily anywhere near as pronounced as some of the other components within this one, subtle and present enough to justify that level 3 mark. Stone fruit, level 3, and I believe I said something along the lines of a little bit more sugary of a stone fruit aspect to it, although it does come out in a cleaner and fresh fruit sense as well at times. So did appreciate that, because it did give the fruit a little bit more depth to this one, as opposed to just being a very straightforward chocolate bar like a cup of coffee. Last thing worth discussing is the body at a level 2. And once again, maybe a little surprised. Geishas obviously tend to be lighter bodied coffees, but given that we were working with the Peruvian coffee, I might have expected that to score a little higher, as well as a more concentrated recipe yet again with Coffea Circulor's 15-to-1 recipe. Nonetheless, it still scored at a level 2, lighter bodied cup of coffee, and that could also be attributed to the fact that it was a geisha and brewed through the Chemex. But outside of that, as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it's a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I definitely enjoyed it. And if I'm being completely honest, when it comes to these Peruvian Geshes that we've reviewed this year, I feel like I've had a slight preference towards the other ones we had from September and say in the past, mostly because those ones were a little bit more intense and they went away from the characteristics of the Origin. And while that shouldn't be a knock on this coffee, because you should want to experience the Peruvian characteristics as well as the Gesha-like characteristics of this coffee, I feel like with those skewing a little bit more on the floral and fruity side of things, that made it a little bit more enjoyable for me, as that's the type of profile that I do enjoy a little bit more as opposed to the traditional characteristics. Though that's not a knock on the traditional characteristics, because I really appreciated those aspects of this coffee. The caramel was great, that nougat-like aspect was great, and having those be the sweeter qualities of this coffee was very nice. I just appreciate when the sweeter qualities come in a much more fruity and floral sense, so that's probably the big difference as to my preference for Peruvian Geshas. Once again, I'm really impressed by Peruvian Geshas in general as they continue to turn out some very nice coffees. This one is no exception, as I found this to be a very enjoyable one start to finish. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to. There are a lot of things that go into this one, and I think the first place I want to start is maybe a little bit more of the traditional Origin characteristics. So of course that candy bar-like aspect, if you enjoy those aspects of this one in a much more clean sense, and that's something that would definitely be of a suggestion to you for this coffee. In addition to that, some fruit depth, as there's plenty of the sweeter citric qualities in this one, still offering plenty of the Gesha-like characteristics with a lighter bodied profile, as well as plenty of florality, that fruit component, and definitely some nicer sweetnesses. That's something that I continue to experience from these Peruvian Geshas. But for the most part, that's the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Orion WX Wash Process Peru from Coffea Circulor. Thank you for watching.